You know, we're about to dive into one of the most, well, unsettling studies in modern psychology. It's an experiment that really cuts to the core of what it means to be a good person. And it poses this deeply uncomfortable question. Is being moral a luxury we can only afford when we have time? Okay, let's start with a little thought experiment. Just picture this. You're walking down a narrow alley, you're on your way to something important, and you see a person just slumped over, groaning. Of course you'd stop, right? I mean, we'd all like to think we would. But what if I told you that the answer might have less to do with who you are and a whole lot more to do with how much of a hurry you're in? For 2,000 years, this story, the parable of the Good Samaritan, has been the gold standard for selfless, compassionate behavior. It's about someone who helps a total stranger, an enemy even, at great personal cost. It pretty much defines what it means to do the right thing, and it is right at the center of the experiment we're talking about today.
Now this is where it gets really interesting, who the researchers picked for this study. They didn't just grab random people off the street. No, they chose students at the Princeton Theological Seminary. I mean, these are people studying to become priests and ministers, whose entire lives are dedicated to the principles of compassion and helping others. If anyone is going to stop and help a person in need, it's got to be them, right?
So this is where the experiment gets so clever. See, the researchers weren't just going to ask these students about their beliefs. They were about to put them to a very real, very direct test, right in the middle of an ordinary day. Okay, so let's get to the heart of what these two psychologists, John Darley and Daniel Batson, were trying to figure out back in 1973. They wanted to know what really wins out in a moment of crisis. Is it our deeply held values, our character, or is it the immediate pressures of our situation?
And the setup they came up with was brilliantly simple. Each seminary student was asked to prepare a short talk. Then they were told they needed to walk over to another building to record it. And somewhere along that short walk, they would just happen to stumble upon an actor, part of the study, slumped in an alley, coughing and clearly in distress. The researchers threw in a couple of key variables to see what mattered. First, they played with what the students were thinking about. Half of them were assigned to prepare a sermon on, of all things, the parable of the Good Samaritan. The other half got a much more mundane topic, job opportunities for seminarians. So the question was, right, would having the idea of helping freshen your mind make you more likely to, actually help? And this is where the genius and, frankly, the sting of this whole experiment really comes in. They introduced a second, hidden variable, something they suspected would be much, much more powerful than the topic of some sermon. They decided to mess with the students' sense of time. So here's how they did it. As each student was sent on their way, a researcher would say one of three things. For the first group, it was, "Oh, you've got plenty of time, you're early." For the second group, "The assistant is ready for you, so you should probably head right over." And then for the high-pressure group, it was, "Oh, you're late. They were expecting you a few minutes ago. You better get moving." Okay, so the stage is set. The students are walking toward the other building, their minds are on sermons or jobs, their watches are ticking or not, and in the alley, the man is coughing and groaning. And the results, well, they weren't just surprising, they were profoundly troubling. First off, the absolute shocker. Thinking about the Good Samaritan made no difference at all. Zero. A student who was literally about to go preach on the importance of helping a stranger was no more likely to stop than one who was thinking about their career. I mean, that alone is a pretty stunning insight into how we operate. But this chart, this tells the real story. The only thing that really mattered was time. Of the students who thought they were early, a pretty decent 63% stopped to help. Okay, when they were on time, it dropped to 45%. But what about students who were told they were late? Just 10%, 1 in 10. Think about that. When these future religious leaders felt the simple pressure of a ticking clock, their compassion almost completely vanished. Their commitment to helping another human being was just steamrolled by the mundane pressure of being on time for an appointment. And the descriptions from the experiment are just devastating. The alley was only about 4 feet wide, so to get past the man, you pretty much had to step over him. And some did. On their way to deliver a sermon about the Good Samaritan, some of them literally stepped over the suffering man in their path. The irony is just crushing. So what are we supposed to take away from all this? This wasn't just about a few students having a bad day. The experiment points to a much darker
and maybe more universal conclusion about the very nature of our own ethical behavior. This was the core finding, right there in the research paper itself, that our ethical principles, the things we believe make us good people, can become luxuries, things we can't afford. When we're stressed, when we're rushed, when we're just focused on our own goals, our capacity to care for someone else can just be pushed aside. So here it is, the really unsettling takeaway. The experiment suggests that in a moment of crisis, your circumstances, just being late, feeling stressed, can be a far more powerful predictor of what you'll do than your character or your beliefs. The goodness of good people, it seems, is incredibly fragile. And that leaves all of us with a pretty haunting question to think about. The next time you're rushing, you're stressed out, you're late for something, just take a second to think about this experiment. Because it really forces us to ask ourselves, when the pressure is on, who do we really become?